Hi, everyone, and welcome back to that UFO podcast. Joining me today, my guest is an author of multiple books, including the acclaimed American Cosmic, Encounters, and more. She is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington, and in the last few years, one of my favorite people to speak to on the UFO phenomenon. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka. How are you, Diana?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back, Andy.
I would have you on weekly, Diana, and honestly, I could fill enough shows to do that. So, yeah, if your diary ever dries up, which I doubt, that's something that can be arranged. But there's a lot I want to get through, Diana, in the kind of time we've got together. So many listeners got in touch, so many different topics we could jump around. But I think I have to start asking you a little bit about the here and now, because
Mhm,
2025 with the UFO topic has started off with a little bit of a bang, and people are struggling, I think, to keep up with all the different directions the
mhm,
conversation's going in. So I want to get first off your thoughts on the Skywatcher group. Jake Barber, of course, came forward with Ross Coulthart. I
mhm.
imagine you saw that interview, I'm guessing, yeah?
Of course. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So he came forward in a pretty big way via News Nation, and he claimed he was part of, a UFO retrieval program. If folks haven't seen that yet, perhaps you're newer to the topic. He's had some incredible experiences. First, then, what were your thoughts on Jake's story itself?
Okay, so this is all right. I'd like to start by talking about it generally, if that's okay with you. So that program is something that I'm not aware of that particular program, but I'm aware of that framework for accessing or driving ships, okay, craft, whatever you want to call it. Um, Obviously, it's something that's been known because Stephen Greer, of course, has his CE5 protocols that he's been utilizing. Um, and in the UFO community, generally, he's controversial with respect to that. Um, but in the historical record, you do have people who, in fact, this is the reason why in 2012, aerospace engineers and people associated with the Space Force were interested in my work because it in the historical record, the Catholic historical record, you do see instances where people have interface with things that are we would call UAP, and not just that, but there are a lot of things that surround that ability, including a certain type of lifestyle, right? So certain things and help uh, help that process. In American Cosmic, I wasn't aware at all of these programs. I was, naive professor going in thinking that I was studying, something that wasn't actually true, but people believed in nonetheless. And of course, I was shocked. And that's part of why American Cosmic, I think, appeals to people because it's shocking to look at this. And I was a skeptic as I went in and not a skeptic as I left. So the thing is that it appears that someone like Tyler D in the book was a person who was able to do this type of interface and I was fascinated by the the lifestyle that he led. When we went to the Vatican, we also met people who were had a type of lifestyle, like they weren't on the internet. Some of them didn't use phones. In fact, I had to when I met them in person, and if we corresponded through hard mail. Okay, so they were completely what most people would call like sequestered, with very few exceptions of having communication with outside people. So I felt really lucky that I was able to have communication with these people. Now, this was all way before 2018. Okay, this is before 2018. So I didn't really have a framework for understanding what was going on. And I feel, even though I wrote about it and I have data about it, I feel like what's happening now is just giving me the language and the understanding because it's a revealing, right? There are lots of things that are now being revealed. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's what happened when I did that, or that's what happened, when this person told me this. Now I understand. Um, with respect to that particular Skywatcher, I don't feel comfortable commenting on it because I don't know the people involved. And even though in theory this is something that I know is done, I don't know about that particular group of people. So I would be remiss to talk about it. I I have to talk about the things that I know about the people who I know. So I can't talk about it. I can I can only talk about it generally.
So fair enough. That's a very fair point. The general idea then that this group would use psionics or some kind of telepathy to summon a craft. If you talk about that generally, and you mentioned Stephen Greer, rightly to say controversial, but there's not a lot that isn't controversial in this UFO conversation, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
The idea that any group would summon a craft or be able to, can you talk on that concept? And is that dangerous in the same way that people say, don't use a Ouija board because you don't know what you're summoning or what you're opening up?
Yeah, so there are a few things I can say about that. First off, when we call it a craft, I think that that's a general term that people use, but nobody really knows what it is. Okay, so of people that I've met who've talked about having access to looking at whatever this is, they are saying that there's nothing that looks like technology. There's nothing that looks like, this is where you turn this thing on. Okay, then that makes more sense than to understand that there's some type of human to object interface, right? Which is something that to me seems much more likely if you look at the history of this phenomena. Um, when people have these experiences, just general people who don't want these experiences, say they just happen to be in this place at the right time, right moment, or if they don't want the experience, the wrong time, wrong moment. Um, It seems that in 80% of the cases, they feel like there is some type of interface with it. Um, I met a person who was a kid. Well, I met actually a lot of grown-up witnesses when they were, as grown-ups, but they talked about what happened to them as like 12 years old, 11 years old, 13, 14. And they've had these experiences with these things that we'll just call craft for, because that's what we're calling it. And they felt that it somehow hooked onto them or hooked into their consciousness, and they felt like they were part, they were communicating with it regardless of whether they wanted to or not. All right, so there's that. I have met people who are very religious and live what we call the sequestered type of life, who um, are known people to have had these experiences with this. They do call it something like they're driving it. Okay, so they do say it's like a pilot situation. All right, so I have heard that. Now this is not to say that I bel I believe it. Remember, I teach religious studies, which means that my method is agnostic. I neither believe nor disbelieve. I'm taking data in. Okay, that doesn't mean that I don't have my personal opinion about it.
Yeah.
um, right now, it's something completely, you know, when we're looking at it now, it's being presented to us as something that the military is involved with. And that's pretty interesting, right? Because the military would not recognize anything like that. The US military is what I'm talking about. They wouldn't recognize anything like that 5 years ago. Okay. So this is like, you're right. It's just happened. It's happened in 2025. Um, so that's a little bit of the context of what I could say. Another thing I'd like to say is that, again, this was something that I mentioned in American Cosmic when I'm going out into the desert with, I'll call him Tyler D because he hasn't said that I can call him his name yet. Okay. I know a lot of people talk about that person,
Right.
but I respect that situation. Gary Nolan has come out as Gary Nolan. So I was there with Gary Nolan and Tyler D, and we're going out to see what Tyler D calls a crash retrieval, a place of crash retrieval. And what's interesting is that the night before, Gary shares some of his research with us, and he has his computer and he shows us photo after photo after photo of events, what I call contact events, events where people have interfaced with these craft. And these are, and by the way, I've never written this in any publication. I do academic publications, and I've never written that night I prayed. But in this case, I did, because it was so disturbing to see that there were things that appeared to be like burns and damage and things like that. And it looked like a dangerous activity. And I didn't know, I still was not, this is the beginning of the book, by the way. So I still was not a believer, but that definitely was pushing me in the direction of Gary is not making this up. Like, this is exactly what I'm seeing. These photographs, they're not made up, and they're from all over the world. So I can say that about this too. So no, I don't think a person should engage in this personally. That's my personal opinion.
You mentioned about how you feel now you've got some of the language for things that you perhaps didn't when you were getting into the study of UFOs. And I feel there's a large percentage of folks who, as the UFO topic's becoming stranger, a little more mainstream, we're having terms introduced to us that perhaps psionics isn't a new word, but it's perhaps more commonly used now in the UFO community because Jake Barber's come out with these other folks and mentioned it. And there's almost a hesitancy for some people to accept what they're hearing because it's not the disclosure they imagined. If we're going to go with this being, disclosure, let's just say, let's be lazy with the language. Do you appreciate that? And how do you speak on that people are seeing whistleblowers come forward, not how they thought it would be, that perhaps you can summon craft telepathically, that it's not people coming from distant star systems, perhaps they're more local and interdimensional, and how things are starting to play out?
It's true. So once a person is introduced to the topic of UFOs, they look at it, UFOs, UAP, they look at it as how media has primed us to see it. Okay. Just like angels. So for the most part, until we had awesome shows us, well, this is what a real angel looks like, biblical angels. Um, we think these are these beautiful things with wings and so forth. But when you look at, if you're a religious studies person, you know that's not true, because you're looking at the text itself and the sources themselves, and they're telling you these have all kinds of different presentations, like they look different. So there's no one type of angel representation. But they're absolutely not like the ones we think we see, right? So in fact, there are some that do look like that, small minority. So we've been primed by media technologies from kids. Either we had X-Files growing up, we had media that had to do with UFOs and little green men kind of thing, the flying saucer, that type of thing. Okay, so and when we think of disclosure, we tend to think, when are they going to bring out the bodies, or when are they going to show us the flying saucer so that we can see it and see somebody drive it around, right?
Yeah.
When White House lawn. But, just within a month of doing intense study in the topic and reading the works of, say, John Keel or Jacques Vallée, you begin to understand, or even Alan Hynek, you begin to understand that no, it doesn't look like that. UFOs do not look like that. So the common perception of a person on the street, if you stop them and said, have you ever had a UFO encounter, or what do you think one looks like? Or, they will give you what they have seen on television, in the media, in their video games. Okay. So no, it does not look like that. So once you start, that's why, by the way, religious studies is interesting, because there's a historical record of contact events with non-human intelligences. And that's what it looks like. So today's UFO looks like that. And how to, so it's complicated. And it's and do you asked me if I appreciated it? I do, but I also think that, people are when I first published American Cosmic people were confused. They were like, why is a person who studies religion writing about UFOs? Now it's not confusing once they start to see what's happening in terms of people talking about UFOs in, everyone like the Tim Gallaudet, the Admiral, Lou Elizondo, everybody who's coming out and talking about it, they're also saying it's not what you think, everyone. Like it's a lot weirder than you think, and it has some spiritual components and things like that. Do I appreciate that? Yes, I do, actually. I appreciate that only because it's accurate. I'm not saying, I'm saying, yeah, it is accurate. And this is something also that I think we should think about, or at least I think about it. If there's and by the way, Jacques Vallée has always said this, right? He's always said it's not ET. It's either interdimensional, or he doesn't actually know what it is. He's never concluded as to what it was. He's always suggested that we look at this from an academic perspective. We use science to study it and the scientific method. He has, though, in his first book, Passport of Magonia, he's traced it to folk traditions and religions and things like that. So he's done that. So when we look at that and we look at the events of contact that people have and report from 1,000 years ago, say, there are elements to that they recognize were important. And those were elements of being really careful and also not utilizing it for ways that we should not be utilizing it for. I think that we need to take a look, because if in fact this is what it has always been, right? If it is a historically pervasive phenomena, we already have information about it. We shouldn't chuck that information out. Buddhism, right? Buddhism talks about having contact events with beings like this. And it says part of your spiritual practice, if you're getting good at it, you'll be seeing these things. Ignore them. Okay. So I hate to be that person who says that, because I have a lot of people who come to me and want to utilize this to just out of curiosity, or just because they want to reverse engineer something for monetary purposes, whatever that motivation is. And I'm always telling them, I just don't think that's a good idea.
I wonder, how do we move on then from those societal norms that you mentioned? The biblical depiction of angels is so different to what people believe or say in their head when you say that. I've mentioned before, I think, on this podcast, that the when you ask someone what sound does a frog make, they tend to say ribbit. But there's only one type of frog that does that, and it's native to Hollywood. So when movies started putting frogs in the movies,
That's great.
the frogs went ribbit. But actually, most frogs go croak. But people
Mhm.
don't do that. They make a ribbit. So I've tried to say to people when getting into the UFO chat in public, so what sound does a frog make? And they'll say ribbit, and you go, actually no, but the media's trained you to think that's what they do. One very particular frog makes that noise, and it sounds so geeky, doesn't it? But I think it's a nice way to, that's the influence the media's have, that's what you think frogs are, but it's not. So that's similar to what you're saying about biblical depictions of angels, demons, whatever you want to call these different entities in the UFO topic as well. How do you move the public on from those images that are so ingrained in their minds?
Yeah, I mean, you try to do it, because I was I think it's the producing consultant is what the title was. I'm not good at these, that's not my thing, is to do consulting for documentaries and stuff, but I have been doing that. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because that's what I want. I want people to understand on a mass level, instead of just picking up my book and reading it, or your podcast or anything like that. But this does help, by the way. Your podcast helps. My book helps, right? But those documentaries, especially when they're produced by, say, Steven Spielberg, they get out there. And so I was the consultant for the Amblin, which is Spielberg's group, documentary called Encounters. And I worked with them, and they listened to me. And so we did a bunch of stuff to try to get this message across that this, and a lot of it was in Japan, actually, where the idea of UFOs is a lot different than the idea that we have of UFOs. So they tend to see UFOs in a much more organic, historical way. And so I thought this would be a great way for Americans to understand, or, people from England or whatnot, us, to understand the UFO more in a more accurate way. Um, so they did that. They actually did that, but the editors cut it out. They cut that out. So a lot of what I suggested, they listened to, and they had those people in there, and they focused on that. But I guess because in the end they're doing a documentary that they want to sell to Netflix or so forth, they have to, they have to cue into what people are already expecting, which is
Mm.
sad. It's happened with me and my editor too. So not my editor at Oxford, although there were some things that she asked me to take out, which I'm glad I didn't take out. Like details that I saw in New Mexico that now I understand why they were there. But at the time, I thought they were really strange. Um, but my so a lot of times my editor says, well, is this what a UFO is like? And I'm like, well, yeah, this is what it's like. It's not like what you think it's like. So, they're asking me to publish a book that would be fake, a fake book about the UFO. I'm not going to do that because that's not what I do. And so I think documentaries, I think podcasts, I think it's a process. I don't think it'll happen overnight, but it's certainly happening faster than I thought.
Have you got any involvement with Spielberg's new blockbuster, which is being filmed, Disclosure?
No, I don't. They came to me, I don't know, like a year ago or so, and I said that, I mean, I think they were focusing on stuff that I wasn't going to focus on. So they wanted to focus on the materials, the reverse engineering, and that type of thing, which I understand, but I wasn't, I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. So, but I'm absolutely certain it's going to be good because they produce such a great um documentary with encounters, and I'm really proud to be part of it.
Yeah, I think the movie's just started filming the last couple of days as well, so we've got a little while till it comes out. Still scheduled for 2026 at the minute, but in the meantime, this might bleed actually nicely into another topic. The Age of Disclosure trailer was released. This is a documentary which is from Dan Farah, who was Spielberg's producer on Ready Player One. It's got some huge names attached to it, politically especially. Do you see this perhaps being a bit of a needle mover?
I do, and I believe it's being premiered at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So South by Southwest has like 10,000 people who who attend that conference. I spoke at it last year. And this is going to be, these are people who are facilitators, so they'll watch the movie and then they'll get it out there too. So in a sense, it's like a catalyst event. So it was really
Mm.
intelligent that it premiered at South by Southwest. And yes, it has a lot of the people who you don't actually see on Twitter X and Instagram and stuff like that, because that's not their thing. They don't do that, but they're in the movie. You'll see them, and I think that's important. And thankfully, because a lot of what the public sees doesn't reflect who's actually behind the scenes doing this. I call these folks the invisibles. They're now coming out as who they are. So in that show, we'll see them. We'll see them talk. We'll learn about everything. We'll learn about like the things that have been going on behind the scenes.
So it's interesting timing because that's premiering in a couple of weeks, early March, mid March. You would then hope in the near future afterwards I can't see it getting a theatrical release, but I imagine it would go to a major streaming provider, whether that's Apple or Netflix seems to be the dream for everyone, but there's multiple streamers out there. Hopefully it gets to a big audience. But in the US right now, there's a declassification task force that's been set up that politically is being led by representatives from Congress, including Anna Paulina Luna, James Comer, and others. And it's looking to crack open in only 6 months some of the great cover ups of all time. How do you see this having any impact at all? Because if you said to me, Diana, there is a task force set up that's going to get to the bottom of what happened on 9/11 or with Epstein or with UFOs, and they've got 6 months, I wouldn't think that's enough time. But to put all of this stuff in together and run with it, is this being set up to fail?
I honestly think that they say 6 months, but there are people who have that information. And it's not been 6 months, it's been the entire time that these secrets have been around. Will this happen? I I mean, of course, I hope something happens. Hope something, you know, is known. Again, I think that we have to be careful. I really appreciate what the Congress people are doing, and I really appreciate that. I really honestly feel that they are on, when I say our side, they're really hoping to do this, but they have their hands tied too. So I guess I'm waiting. It's a wait and see, a hopeful wait and see.
Yeah, the new administration's obviously been ripping up whatever they've been ripping up. Won't go into the politics of it, but I think a lot of folks have been disappointed that one of the things with the last administration going out, and I'm talking as a neutral, being based in the UK, that the Biden administration had the drone stuff happen right at the end, and Trump said he was going to get to the bottom of it, and within days we would know. And then very quickly, they came out with a statement saying, "Yeah, it was all approved. FAA knew about it. Nothing to worry about. Crack on." This disappointed a lot of folks because even if you don't want to think, and I don't think it was NHI related, I don't think these were UFOs, UAP, whatever. Something strange was happening with all of those drone sightings, the legitimate ones anyway, and it was dismissed. So, is it fair to say then, if you're going to accept that at face value, if indeed that's what happened, or they're helping the cover up, why would anything different happen with the UFO topic?
I totally agree. I think that you have to understand that at the moment, it's really, well, let's just put it this way. I didn't think it was NHI, frankly. Um, but most likely it had to do with national security, frankly.
Yeah.
And that's when they do something so obviously in our face, and then sometimes they have to, I guess. I've met enough people in the military who I in this topic, NHI and UAP, and they're good people. And if they're saying something, there's a reason why they can't say this or that. They're doing it for a reason. So that's my position.
Yeah, and that's fair. And what I want to do is start to dig into some of those a little bit more. With some listener questions, Diana, I get a whole load sent in. You would be sitting here for hours if I was to go through them all. So here's a selection that I've got, and thank you to everyone who sent them in. I do read them all, so it's Diana's fault. I'm not going to get through them all, folks. You can blame Diana, okay? Um, what to do is buy one of our books, write a hateful message in it, and send it back. No, don't do that. What we'll do though is we'll get through what we can. And Algo says, "Hi Diana, it feels like we're at a turning point with psionics now being mentioned. The line between scientific research on UAP and more mystical or esoteric ideas seem to be blurring. I worry it may be soon impossible to separate the two. So I have two questions for you. One, do you think this is a problem for serious research on the phenomenon?" And I'll ask you that question first, then get to the second.
Sure. Um, I think that the serious research that's been being done on this issue absolutely knows that the demarcation of consciousness studies and nuts and bolts is a false demarcation, and that they've been taking this into account since Alan Hynek. So that's a long time ago. I did do a podcast. I don't know if it'll run actually, with Hal Puthoff, and it might be sponsored by NASA, but I don't They may or may not sponsor it because of what was said in the podcast. Because there was some other people in the podcast too, so I'm not sure. But the part where I was speaking with Hal was great. So basically, I took examples from past contact events in a historical record, Joseph of Cupertino and Teresa of Avila, and I gave them to Hal. I even took some really interesting video from an example that happened in the early 1960s in Garabandal, Spain, where young kids saw the Virgin Mary, and it looks like they're levitating while in trance. They're moving backwards. I mean, they're doing a lot of things that look pretty related to UAP experiences. So I shared this with him, and then he was able to talk about it from a physics point of view. So he spoke about the vacuum, his expertise, and he also talked about his work with Ingo Swann and how Ingo Swann was, obviously Ingo Swann is a very one of the best remote viewers, but Ingo Swann also wrote a book about Virgin Mary apparitions. And if any of your listeners are interested in that, they should get that. It's really interesting. So he breaks those down, just like Hal and I were breaking down some of these. Now, would Catholics be upset with this? Would religious people be upset with this? Probably some of them would. But I'm Catholic, and I don't think that it's wrong to do. Some things are there's a line to cross, but I think it's okay to understand that what's happening on a level that's physics. We were given the ability to understand physics. We're given rationalism, and so it was a really cool discussion, and I hope it does run.
Definitely, yeah, that sounds very interesting. The second part of that question was, for those of us interested in the UFO topic, how can we maintain scientific rigor? How do we separate sense from nonsense when exploring the realm of consciousness?
Okay, so this is where we get into in academia. Okay, so and I'm not suggesting academia is the place that UAP research has been happening. It has not been happening. However, since 2021, academics have thronged into this area. Uh, my books have been taught in courses, university courses around the world. I've been teaching students, some of whom are doing PhDs, masters, and things like that. So I actually teach a UFO course that's not part of my university, that people are learning from, and we're basically doing academic work. So that's such a great question. How do we separate what's what's good work, right, from stuff that is not good work? That's what we do in academia. And when I say that in my field and in most fields in academia, if you're going to be established at a university, you actually have what's called blind peer review. You have to send your work and send your data, your calculations to people that hand it out then to people who are experts. And those experts then blindly review your work. And maybe there's 3 of those people. Then they have to all say, yeah, this is legitimate, credible work. That's kind of the way it's going on with like the Invisible College and those scientists. They're not invisible anymore, obviously, but they're looking at the work and they're basically saying this looks credible. They're blurbing that book, right? So we don't have a peer review process that's yet for UAP scholarship or your scholarship that has to do with UFOs. But in a sense, we're creating one that is spontaneously emerging. So when Gary Nolan writes about his work, he's not calling it UFOs, but sending it out to people in his field who have knowledge of it. And they're saying, yeah, this looks right. And and so that's what's happening. So, it's a process, the peer review work. Okay, so I'm talking, like I said, to people like Hal Puthoff and so forth. These are people who've had their work reviewed, not through the academic peer review, but the US government is asking them for briefings about this topic. Okay, so in a sense, that's credible. They're not just asking anyone. So
So
I guess
you
I'm sorry about that, Andy. I have more to say about that. So
go.
it's really difficult. I think you should listen to podcasts like Andy's, and you know, and find out who he's reading. Like, who is he reading? What books does he think are credible? Ask people, is there a list that I can find? Jacques Vallée has information. Read all of his books, read his journals. Go to Alan Hynek, read his stuff. And, so this is the type of thing that you just have to immerse yourself. If you're truly interested in this is how it's done.
Really good point. You have just appeared on the Sean Ryan podcast, which was great. I managed to listen to that, Diana, and I think you've gone over a lot of really interesting points that perhaps this is your, I think, third appearance with myself. So if people are listening to this and thinking, what about Diana's background in American cosmic and encounters? We've covered all that in different podcasts. Folks, go back and listen. But Sean Ryan gets a huge audience, hundreds of thousands of people, into the millions for his episodes now. Great reaction to your appearance as well. If you've read the comments, I know YouTube comments can be a wild forest at times, but
Yeah.
the reaction's really, really good. And at the end of his show, his final question to you was, tell me 3 guests you want to come on the Sean Ryan show. One of which, your final one, was Elon Musk. Now, if you're talking about controversial figures right now and on the world stage, Elon's up there. One of the questions sent in to me was from Radical Cartoon, who said, what does Diana think of Elon Musk's statement to Tucker Carlson? There are no aliens, and I'm in a position to know.
Yeah, so that's why Sean, okay, for first off, I have to say a couple of things. I liked that. Sean Ryan is very trained in interviewing, well trained in interviewing, and he got a lot of information out of me that I didn't, I actually never, not, I don't share it publicly. So now it's all out there, and I'm like, okay, I don't know if I want to read the comments. I won't read them. Absolutely not. And I have had a lot of, I wouldn't call it hate email, but I call it, well, some was. They were, people like Christians who were really upset about purgatory and saying that
Mm.
Catholics don't know about it now. Well, actually, that's true that a lot of Catholics don't do the devotions that they did pre-Vatican II. And I know it's a doctrine of the church, and I have written, my first book was about purgatory. So, they just listen to me saying that, and they think that I don't think it's a doctrine. And then I have people doing videos of why Diana Pasulka is wrong, and and that type of thing. Okay. This is when you do public scholarship, this happens, and that's fine. That's fine. Elon Musk. Okay, so part of the reason that first of all, that was hard for me to, for some reason I blanked out on people who he should interview. I don't know why, but I did. I think it's because of the way he was asking the questions. And I said Elon Musk because, first off, I'm writing a book right now about AI and UAP, and Elon Musk, of course, is first he does space. He has SpaceX. I've known about his work for years because of American Cosmic. Some of the people who were in that book worked with him. So I do know that he has, I don't think that statement, I'm in a position to know, um, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not accurate. Okay. But what I do know is fascinating is that he is considering AI in a way that I think we should all think about it, because it accords with the in the Catholic record. You see a lot of people who've um, forecasted today. When I say today, I'm talking about this era, and they forecasted AI. And you think, how did they do that? How did they know that? So this current book that I'm writing is basically showing how this idea has been a persistent theme, talking about something like a shift in humanity that's really, really important. Okay. I'm not going to say it's the end times, but that's exactly what that how they're looking at it. Okay, so Desjardins is saying it looks like there's going to be a shift in humanity, perhaps another form of humanity. So he's looking at it like in an evolutionary way, and I know that that's in a way how Elon Musk looks at it. But I'm curious. So when I was getting through the interview with Sean, and he was using amazing interview skill, I thought, oh, I would love to see him interview Elon Musk, because I think that he would get some information about this topic from him, and that would help me. So that's why, um, a lot of times when I'm in that position, I feel like I'm put on the spot and I can't have forethought about it. But I was doing that strategically. I was thinking, who would I think is the best person that Sean could extract information from? And that's who I said. And Sean thought it was a great idea.
Yeah, you done well. And unfortunately, I don't give gifts on this podcast, so you'll have to just make do with the gift of conversation. But I know Sean gives good gifts out, so yeah, he's got the money for it though. Uh, quite a lot of questions came in, Diana, about Chris Bledsoe. So to go over a couple of those, EG593 said, "I'd love to know more about Diana's involvement with Chris Bledsoe. His story has evolved more recently, but how does she remember this and what stood out that resonated?"
Okay, so Chris and his family live about an hour and a half away from me. And when I first began this study, is when Chris, in 2012, around that time, Chris was starting to talk about his experience. And his family's wonderful. His kids are extremely gifted, intelligent, and good kids. Uh, his wife is lovely. Okay. Um, so I spent about 2 or 3 years, because I was, learning about the topic and just immersing myself in the communities. And I spent about 2 or 3 years um, learning what was going on with him. But for reasons that I just can't talk about, um, I just I stopped uh, utilizing that information. I know people who uh, you know, I didn't authorize anything to go into his book, no photos or anything like that. So, yeah, so I generally don't talk about that.
That's fair enough. If you could speak generally then on this, because just recently Chris made a claim that he thinks the second coming of Christ could be in Easter 2026. And given your particular wheelhouse of religious studies, when people make claims like that, what goes through your head?
Yeah, so first what goes through my head is that, in fact, the first conversation that was truly amazing that I had with Chris was on the Wrightsville Beach here, which is this beautiful beach. And it was at a MUFON meeting, and it was the sun had gone down. It was really a beautiful night. And Chris was telling me about the apocalyptic visions that he was having. And I already knew by that time that this was something that absolutely happened to people who were experiencers. But I also told him this. I said, Chris, people have been having these apocalyptic visions for over 2,000 years, and we're still here. I said, so it could possibly be that, this might happen. I mean, who am I to say that it's not going to happen? This might happen, but then again, it might not happen. Okay, so I don't think that, it's because at that point he had a huge garden, and he was giving all of his food away to people because he wanted to make sure that he could feed his family during this time that he was certain was going to happen. Um, so we're talking 200 years before Jesus is around. There are apocalyptic visionaries in what's called Second Temple Judaism, and they're certain that the end time is next week, right? When Jesus is killed by Rome by crucifixion, his followers think that at any moment it's going to happen. Okay. Um, when I talk to experiencers, they also tell me this is going to happen. This is going to happen probably next week or something like that. So there's an urgency. So the way I think about it is that these folks are they're accessing some knowledge that could be beyond the time that we consider. We're in linear time. Linear time kind of plots along, right? So they could be accessing a truth of some time past or future. I don't know. I'm not disclaiming that they're that this could possibly happen at some point. um but generally, people, part of the reason that I got into this was because I was concerned, because it was 2011. This is before I looked at UFOs. And my students were talking about the Mayan apocalypse, and they thought it was going to happen in 2011. And there was a man in California who's since passed away, who basically had a date. And he said, this is going to happen. There were parents that were giving this man their life savings, their children's college savings for this man, because everyone thought that the event was going to happen. The dissolution of the earth was going to happen on this, I think it was in May 2020. I'm sorry. Yeah, 2011 in May. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that I felt an obligation to teach a course on the apocalypse so that students wouldn't be so frightened, because they were very afraid. And I thought, there was a person who committed suicide because they thought it was going to happen.
Hmm.
And I not a responsible thing to do, because most likely it's not going to happen. And I said the same thing then as I'm saying today. Do I know that it's not going to happen? No. Do I have good probability that it's not going to happen? Yes. Has there been a whole history of people proclaiming this? Yes.
Yeah, that's very fair. You've got history on your side when it comes to apocalyptic predictions that, as of yet, we haven't had any come to fruition, and I don't think it's one that you would want to come to fruition. We've just found out the asteroid that had a near 4% chance at one point of hitting us in 2032 is now down to 0.00004% or something like that. So
Thank goodness.
yeah, we've escaped it. Then again,
I,
sometimes I see the news, Diana, sometimes and think, are we due a reset at some point? Because things aren't going particularly well for us as a species, but we've been given another go at it. So,
I have another comment. Within the scriptures themselves, of the Christian scriptures, there is, the notion that one can't predict when it's going to happen because one doesn't know. So that's scriptural.
yeah, I have an issue with anything that predicts times and dates and years anyway, especially when it comes to the UFO topic, because then there's this idea that whatever these entities are have an idea of our time calendars, clocks, and have said to us, 2027, the 1st of June, we're going to arrive on the White House lawn. That for me is a whole weird conversational set that just doesn't sit comfortably with me. But
Okay.
yeah, go on with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So along the same lines, here is a book that your listeners should read, and it's a book that is excellent. It's old, but it's still being taught in courses throughout uh, the globe. Actually, it's called "When Prophecy Fails," and it's about these sociologists at Stanford who decide to infiltrate a UFO. They called it a UFO cult, but it's a little UFO group where the leader says, on this day the UFOs are coming, and the whole earth will be destroyed, but we will be able, the ship will take us away. And so all of these people believed it, and the sociologists knew, they thought they knew that this prophecy would not come true. It would not come true. So they knew what they were studying. They wanted to study what would happen when it failed to be true. And it sure enough failed to be true. But what the people did was, and I quote this actually in American Cosmic because it's something that we should know, is that they reformulated their beliefs, and they said, well, because we did this, the ET said that humanity avoided it this time, the cataclysm, and that's why. So the person who led our group, which was this woman, she wasn't lying. Okay,
Yeah.
so thinking she was lying. Um, the thing is here, is very important to understand that a lot of times these people are not lying. They truly, honestly believe this because they are being told this, okay, by whatever, part of their brain or beings or whatnot. I know these people believe it.
Yeah. And I think that reflects in the UFO conversation. You mentioned, Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it these days. There are a lot of folks do the same thing where I have heard from sources that this will be happening soon, or they put a date on it. Sure enough, it doesn't happen. Well, things changed, etc., or something vaguely similar happens elsewhere, and they connect the dots in that way. It's a kind of win-win for them that you can always say something changed in the background, or something did happen that was vaguely remotely connected, and that's what it was. It's a bit of a frustration, I think, for a lot of folks in the UFO conversation. But if you're going to get involved, you just have to accept that that kind of stuff's going to happen.
Yeah, so there is a lot of rhetoric. Somebody was talking about this. Actually, I looked at Danny Jones and Jesse Michaels talking yesterday.
I've not watched it yet. Yeah.
It gets pretty intense right away. And I didn't realize that Danny Jones had changed his whole um podcast studio to a UFO, right? So they spoke right away about the industry of ufology, like it's a huge industry now. Well, it has always been a huge industry, okay? And that's not atypical of religion. So one of the first things I say in American Cosmic is I say if you go to Lourdes or you go to any place where a contact event happened, like the Virgin Mary, you know, was there and was seen, and it's basically like a carnival, and people are selling all kinds of religious artifacts and things like that. So the industry part is absolutely in line with what we see in religious studies. So the industry has always been there for ufology. You're going to get the people who say, um, you know, I have this, I'm getting information from these people. By the way, I also want to say this because you're a responsible ufologist, okay? I do get people who are from, you know, they have special clearances or whatnot, and they say, Diana, this is what I know. And I know they want me to say those things. I know that they do. Like, I just can tell. And whatever their clearances are, I'm wondering if they're like PSYOP clearances and not legitimate science clearances. So you do have to use your discernment in this field because people will give you misinfo. I've actually stopped posting so much on my social media because I get so much of this information. I just want to be straight up, and it's really hard to be straight up here. But I believe that there are a lot of people who are straight up in the field, but yeah, there's a lot that's not.
Yeah, I've had sometimes it's not about me. I never like the podcast to be about me, but a few times people have mentioned things to me, whether it's been guests off air or I get emails or DMs from people. They might be well known, they might not be. And I think, does it really matter what they've told me? There's no point in me passing the information on because there's no way to prove it. It can only be proven to be wrong ultimately at some point, or it just stays in the ether. So it's best that this stuff comes out from reputable people, reputable researchers, and if and when the time's right. There's been things I've seen or heard, nothing major, and before people get, their pants in a twist. But you then see come out months later down the line. And it's, oh, well, I could have said that on the podcast 6 months ago. Loads of other people could have done the same, I'm sure, on theirs. But why? There's no merit to it. I'd rather talk about it once it's out in the public domain, and then there's maybe something more to it. And at that point, I think you get to see a lot of people's opinion that helps me shape what my opinion is going to be. Because I like to look at what everyone says and then kind of pick from there.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So as a person who interfaces with the public, both you and I, we're targets of people who want to plant misinformation.
Can be. I'm a boring one to target folks, so I wouldn't waste your time. Um, Honestly, if some of the emails I get with people saying, "I'd love to be a guest on your show," or "I've got this information to share you," and I'm just like, "Look, speak to someone else. You could be the guest that I pass up on that ends up on Joe Rogan next week, talking about the craft and the hangar that you've worked on. go speak to Joe Rogan first, and then I'll catch up with you down the line. I'm willing to take that risk, folks. Purple Burglar asks, if non-human intelligence is affecting human consciousness, can we understand it with our current science and religion, or do we need a completely new way to think about it?
I think that, as I said, I think that a lot of the people who've been at the cutting edge of this are not known. I think that you have to kind of look once you understand that there are groups who are studying this and you have that framework. When you go through the literature, you can actually see who's doing this, who's picking this out. I like to talk about Jack Parsons and Tchaikovsky of the Konstantin Tchaikovsky of the space program of Russia, because the documents, you can look them up, and there's a lot written about both of them as kind of the fathers of modern rocketry, and both of them have some very interesting, in fact, someone should write a book about it, about the because it gets to exactly what this question is, is science going to be able to do this? Science is already doing it. It's just not being known. Okay, so this, I call it the unorthodox history of science, because scientists, I've had people say to me who are in NASA, like, no, this would be like 7 years ago. There are no aliens, there are no UFOs, Diana, kind of thing. And I'd just be thinking, I happen to know your boss, and so it's really difficult because there's like a policing of what to think. And so the unorthodox science is really interesting. And I think that that's our clue to understanding the science that we are now, we have to utilize this science now. We have to, for lots of different reasons. But yeah, it's been around.
Final listener question from Jen, and I love this as a final question. As you've delved deeper into the intersection of UFOs and religious experiences, has your own sense of faith or the transcendent evolved in unexpected ways? And if so, can you share?
I'll share. Yes. So Jen, I don't advocate for any religion. I don't even advocate for belief or disbelief in UAP. But I can say that once I be- got over the shock that our government was studying something there, and there's a there, um, it definitely impacted my own faith. And the reason it impacted my faith was because whereas previously I had been a person who believed in abstract good, the abstract idea of God as good, and truth and things like that. I believed in that. But I didn't have any visceral understanding of it. But once I started to see what people were looking at, and either damage done or wonderful, amazing things happening, I understood it in the truly historical way, and I became much more. I shifted my life around. I mean, it took I wasn't. They call it getting your life in order, right? I got my life in order, whereas previously it had not been in order, even though I thought I was an okay person. No, this kind of thing makes you, kind of shines a light on you, and then I experienced that.
I appreciate you answering that one. And thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone who sent in questions. I will keep some of those for next time Diana can join us. And just before you go, Diana, I want to ask you about, you mentioned the course earlier you're teaching from an academic standpoint, or that you have available, Beyond the Stars. What is it, and how could folks get involved if they choose to?
Sure. So I was teaching this class live. It started in the summer. The first part of the class it's a Zoom class that has a platform also. So there's a lot of stuff people can access. And so I just stopped teaching that just before I think it was in December. So I was teaching that class for months. And I recorded everything. It's in there. I'm going to repackage it and offer it as an online class. I'll probably teach some other in-person, like Zoom real-time classes. I have a lot on my plate, you know how it is. So, but what I'm considering doing is making this information available to people in an affordable way, because the classes are not super affordable right now, just because they took so much of my time and energy, that I had to take away from things that I was doing. So now I'm considering other platforms where things will be more basically affordable for people. I have people asking me about the class called the Red Pill class that I teach. It's basically the history of this idea. Where did it come from? And I teach that course. And that's actually a course that is my favorite course to teach. It's not necessarily about UAP, but UAP figures in there. But I do have a specifically UAP course, and I have people in there. This week I have Leslie Kane is going to be talking tonight, and Lou Elizondo is going to be talking in the class on Thursday. Tim Gallaudet spoke in the class. I have a lot of people that speak in the class. Dr. E.O. Whiteley.
Yeah, it's recommend people check it out. I've got the link in the description for folks who want to click on there, Diana, and have a look at it. But I appreciate you're looking at repackaging things as well for future for folks. And that affordability always comes up with anything to do with the UFO topic. So if it's something you look at and think, oh, great, but if you hang fire, there's going to be affordable versions of these things down the line as well. And as always, Diana, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it. And look forward to having you back on soon.
Thank you so much.